Chapter 13, the third part of the Chronicle's tale. After vanquishing the dragon, there was a feast in the great hall. Jacob and John and all the knights and I were guests of honor, and we sat with the lord and the lady at the high table. Over dinner, Bertolf admitted that the children had earned their safe passage to Saint Denis. "And we will not be turned over to Michelangelo de Bologna?" Jean confirmed. Bertolf looked at us for a while, as if considering. Then he nodded his bald fat head and said, "I swear it." I swore too. "I will personally escort you to the good Abbot Hubert, whose piety and wisdom is known even as far as Aberdeen. And the red, fat, wicked monk shall not touch a hair on your heads." The children were very grateful. If only they had known. The hall was lit with dozens of torches, dancing and fluttering and casting shadows, strange shadows over 100 feasters, either revealing their true nature or concealing it. One can never tell. A grandmother of a petty knight, an ugly woman with a crooked nose, seemed stately and beautiful in the torch's strange light. A handsome man, a traveling preacher with a wide white smile, seemed cruel and frightening in the same flickering glow. Servants appeared and brought out the rabbit pie, which was delicious. After, though, came out little rounds of cheese, épousses. Oh, we all gagged and pushed it away from us as fast as we could. I'm sure George was going to be sick, right up there on the dais. After the cheese was mercifully taken away, Lord Bertolf lifted himself to his feet. "Oyez!" he cried. "Hear ye!" The hall fell quiet. "I hope you have eaten well," he announced. The question was answered with a mix of half-hearted cheers and more than a few grumbles. Lord Bertolf was a miser. Only the tables up in the front of the hall had gotten rabbit pie. The rest had just pie with no rabbit inside, despite what the servers were calling it. Lord Bertolf smiled and put his hands on his enormous belly. If his guests had been satisfied, he would have known that his cook had been too generous. "I will now accept the petitions and requests. If there are any grievances, I shall hear them." A servant brought up the long candle and set it beside Lord Bertolf and handed him a flame. "I shall light this candle. When there is no tallow left, the period for grievances shall end. Then we shall have a song." Some scattered cheers for that, but mostly there was a rush to form a long line by one of the wooden walls. And so began the most boring part of the whole evening, when landholders accused one another of moving boundary stones, and peasants complained of their neighbors stealing their lambs, and knights demanded satisfaction of one another for imagined and exaggerated insults. The children put their arms on the table and their cheeks on their arms and watched the petitioners file by. I wondered if they were falling asleep. Lord Bertolf rarely let his tenants and vassals finish their claims before announcing his judgment. His wife whispered in his ear and twice forced him to change his verdict when she thought he was being too generous. Her bright eyes shone exactly as brightly, I guessed, as her money box. Then, as the tallow dwindled and the flame began to gutter in the wet wax of the candle, a hunchback appeared on the dais. Everyone quieted to see this lump of rags shuffling forward, his weight leaning on a gnarled stick, his legs bent like bows and caked with mud. "What business do you have in my hall?" Bertolf bellowed. I don't give alms but on holy days, and never in my hall. Begone, you pile of filth! Knights, eject him! Sir Fabian and his crew stood up. Baldwin jumped over the table and approached the beggar from behind. But before he could arrive, the hunchback spoke, his voice strange and high. You have something that is not yours, the hunchback intoned. Return it, and I shall leave your august presence. The people in the hall grew quiet, tense. I have something that belongs to you? Lord Bertolf demanded. How dare you imply such a thing? Lady Galbert Bertolf intervened. Let him say what it is, my dear. Her eyes were shining cold and hard. What do you claim is not rightfully ours, beggar? Suddenly, the hunchback seemed to erupt. He doubled in height, and from his back sprung a missile of fur and teeth. Jean and Jacob, the farmer hunchback bellowed. And in the time it took for the faces of the lord and the lady and all the knights to transform from suspicion to surprise, the boy called William had picked up his walking stick, spun, and smashed Baldwin in the face. The missile of fur and teeth, once a beggar's hump, was Gwynfort, of course. She had bounded over to the knight's table and grabbed Robert by the collar of his shirt. Knights! Lord Bertolf screamed. Mercy! Lord Galbert Bertolf cried. Get him! Sir Fabian bellowed. Stop! Jean and Jacob both shouted. But since everyone was hollering at the same time, no one heard anything, and Fabian, Hay, and Georges rushed at William, while Robert struggled with Gwynfort, and Baldwin lay unconscious on the ground, and Marmaduke stared, stunned. William picked up a table. Yes, an entire table. I saw it with my own eyes, and began to swing it over his head. Dirty plates and goblets went crashing to the floor. So did Lord Bertolf, who fell flat on his face and tried to scramble to the back of the dais. Lady Galbert Bertolf grabbed a knife in each hand and leapt upon her chair and let loose a high, savage battle cry. There were concentric circles of madness radiating out into the hall. Knights and courtiers charging to the front, ladies and children either hiding below the tables or standing on them to get a better view. A troupe of jongleurs, the now superfluous entertainment for the evening, grabbing as many pewter serving plates as they could carry and running for the doors. But up front, Jean wasted no time. She stood up and planted her foot on her stool, leapt upon the table, and launched her entire body on William. The knights, their swords drawn, saw her and froze. William, his back to her, the table raised up above his head, felt her before he saw her. She crashed upon his back and wrapped her arms around his neck. William staggered, trying to spin and strike whatever was on his back with the table. And when he heard Jean shouting directly in his ear, "Stop! Stop! They're our friends! Stop!" William stopped. He looked at the knights, the swords drawn, not moving. The more distant circles of the hall kept up their convulsions, but the central one had altogether frozen. Lord Bertolf on the floor, and Lady Galbert Bertolf from atop a chair, and I crouching behind the table, behind a table, I must admit, and Jacob standing behind the table, and the knights stock still, and even Gwynfort standing above Robert with his collar in her mouth. all looked at William. Say you're sorry, Jean told him. So William said, I am sorry. Put down the table. William dropped the table. A leg broke, and the table lurched and toppled onto its side. Jean, still clinging to his back, said, Turn around and kneel. So William did so, turning his smaller friend around with him like a rucksack. Lord Bertolf, Lady Galbert Bertolf, Jean intoned. May I introduce our friend William, and also Gwynfort the Greyhound? To which there was absolutely nothing to say. The next day I accompanied the children and the knights and Gwynfort the Greyhound on the day's journey to Saint-Denis. William recounted to us how Gwynfort had tracked Jean and Jacob all the way to Bertolf's hall, for which the dog got many pats on the back and scratches behind the ears. They told William of the farting dragon, and he laughed so loud the hills echoed. But after the story, I saw how he looked at them, like he was worried that they had created some sort of a bond that he could never break into. I could see it all over his face, and if I had to guess, I'd say it was an old thought, formed over years of exclusion by the other oblates. I was an oblate once myself. I know how they are. The mind is like a muddy road. Two ruts run down its center from all the carts that have passed that way. No matter how many carts have passed that way, how many carts try to roll alongside the ruts to stay out of the mud, sooner or later, a turn here or a jolt there will send them down into the ruts for good. Just so is the mind. As hard as we try to keep our thoughts out of the old ways, the old patterns, the old ruts, any little jog or jerk will send them right back down into the mud. So it was, I imagine, with William. As we approached the town of Saint-Denis, the road widened, the traffic increased, and I saw Jacob becoming increasingly nervous. He said, I'm not going to the Abbey. I've got to find my parents. They're probably worried to death about me. For a moment, neither William nor Jean spoke. The road was very quiet. At last, William said, Jacob, do you know that your parents escaped the fire? Jacob's face was tight. His nostrils flared. They escaped, he said. They'll be waiting for me at my cousin Yehuda's. My mother said so. William said, Yehuda, the rabbi? Jacob stopped. He pressed his sleeve violently across his eyes and he turned to William. You know him? You know him? Rabbi Yehuda is your cousin? William asked. My mom's cousin. I've never met him, actually. Who is Rabbi Yehuda? Jean wanted to know. Rabbi Yehuda, a famous heathen, William said. His arguments bind the eyes of good Christians with tricks of the devil. Jacob glared at him. You mean he's a Jewish writer? Correct. He's very famous. Notorious. Wise. Jacob's voice was rising. Wicked. So was William's. Gwynfort started to growl at the little boys. Learned. Jacob's face was getting red. In the ways of the evil one, William bellowed. Gwynfort barked at them. His writing is beautiful, Jacob bellowed back. William paused. Yes, that is true. Jacob looked surprised. The big boy shrugged, and then he smiled. Brother Jerome knows Hebrew. He's translated it. Rabbi Yehuda writes more beautifully than any living author, I think. Jacob gazed up at the giant oblate. Well, you might be an idolater, Jacob said at last, but at least you have good taste. And Jean laughed. Winfort stared between the two boys. She barked as if to say, "Now cut it out." Jacob bent down and started to rub her head. Jean said to him, "Come with us. Let's stay together. You come to the monastery. How long could it take? Then we can go and find your parents." Jacob rubbed Winfort's head harder. "We'll be there before supper," William added. Finally, Jacob murmured, "All right, I'll come with you. And then you'll come with me." "Of course," said Jean. "Of course," agreed William. "Thank you," Jacob nodded. Jean reached out and took her friend's hand. Then I saw William noticing it and wince. And then Jean reached out and took William's hand. The wince turned into a smile. Finally, William reached out and took hold of one of Winfort's ears. We all laughed. But the dog shook her head and gave William a look that said, "Play with me or don't, but leave me ears alone." We began to climb the gentle slope. I slowed my pace so that I might say to the children, "Sir Fabian and his men will escort us as far as the gates of Saint Denis. Beyond that, armed men may not go." And then, very gravely, I said, "You must stay close to me. Michelangelo may be there. He is a prior of the abbey, after all." "I don't understand it," said Jean. "Why would the good Abbot Hubert have the wicked Michelangelo de Bologna as his prior?" "Don't you know what they say? Keep your friends close and your enemies closer. Hubert keeps a watchful eye on Michelangelo. Still, do not leave me side until we are in the presence of Abbot Hubert." William said, "Thank you, Brother Gerald. And remember, Hubert is a serious man, more pious than anyone I have ever met. Do not joke with him or be flippant. Be straightforward, be honest, and so he will be with you." And there it is. The children looked up, and there it stood, Saint Denis, the first and most holy of the new wave of monumental churches, the building that all the great cathedrals, Notre Dame, Chartres, Rouen, are modeled after. The sun glinted off its black roof. Spreading out around it was the town of Saint Denis, which was larger than any town that the children had ever seen. It bustled and yelped and crackled and rumbled. For a moment, the children stood there and marveled. And then they took off running down the hill. The knights and I had to jog after them, laughing all the way. We came into the town among the two-story wooden buildings lining up the narrow, muddy lanes. Jean and Jacob kept commenting on how they had built one house on top of the other. William had seen two-story buildings made of stone in his monastery, but 2 stories made of wood and mud, that impressed him too. Merchants and craftsmen leaned out their windows or strolled with their fat, pretty wives clad in richly dyed wool. "Are those lords and ladies?" Jean whispered. "No," I said, "just burghers. They live in the town and give their goods and labor to anyone who will pay for them." "Where are their yards, their farms? And do they work in the fields dressed like that?" "They don't have any farms. They don't work in the fields." "Where do they get their food?" "They buy it." "All of it?" "Yes." "How rich do you have to be," murmured Jean, "to be able to afford to buy all of your food?" Jacob, meanwhile, was scouring the tiny alleys that ran between the tall wooden houses. William noticed. "Any Jews at all?" "There must be somewhere," Jacob replied, his voice tight. And then we were at the gates, and it was time to say goodbye to the knights. Marmaluke reached out his hand to Jacob, and they grasped wrists. It was a sign of great respect. He did the same for William, and finally Jean approached Marmaduke and curtsied. He pulled her pulled her in for an embrace, which surprised us all. "Be careful, little one," he said. Jean looked up at him. "Don't worry, we'll see each other again." Marmaduke's eyes went wide. "Did you have another vision?" She laughed. "No, I just have a feeling." "Well, I won't doubt you. Never again." The children turned and bowed to the rest of the knights, and Jean said, "Thank you for not killing us." And we all laughed. Then we passed into the grounds of the Abbey Church of Saint Denis, the domain of Abbot Hubert and his prior, Michelangelo de Bologna. We passed under the iron teeth of the gate. The children marveled at the great wide bailey where the horses were being led into the stables. Then they saw the facade of the huge church, and their mouths dropped open even further. It is one of the great sights of Christendom. Hundreds of thousands of stones, perfectly hewn and fitted together, shimmering in the sun like a waterfall on a cliff face. But we had no time to gape, for I did not know where our enemy was. Indeed, I was right to worry. "Follow me," I said, "and keep the dog close, and go as quickly as you can." I hurried them forward, past the refectory, in the infirmary, the stairwell to the crypt, and into the small cloisters, through the hallway to the large cloister. Faster and faster we walked. Every brother I saw coming from the doorway or walking up a stair, I thought at first was Michelangelo. The children, too, were peering at the black-robed, hooded men praying or carrying books, hoping that if the wicked monk himself were here, at least we would see him before he saw us. I felt a tug on my sleeve. I turned. Jean was pointing. Across the great cloister, a mountain of flesh, with red hair and bristling whiskers and reddish eyes, strode along with an air of lazy importance, his head thrown back, his whiskers twitching, his eyes roving over the faces of the praying monks, as if he owned them, as if they were praying to him. We all stopped. I don't know why. There's something about that man's power that makes one stop and stare. As we stared, his gaze crossed the cloister. His great body came to a halt. He squinted past the bare trees in the cloister garden, trying to penetrate the shadows of the columns where we stood. And then he stepped from the covered walkway onto the grass. His walk was no longer lazy. It was vigorous and fast, very fast. We stood as still as the columns that had not even hidden us. When Michelangelo was halfway across the cloister, I came to my senses. "Run, children, run!" They took off. Michelangelo de Bologna looked surprised, as if he could not believe that someone would dare to run from him. Then he began to run too, and I would not be lying to tell you that the ground actually shook with each footfall. I turned and sprinted after the children, and an instant later I was pushing ahead of them to lead the way. We turned off the cloister and ran down a long hallway. A monk was coming down a dormitory stairs, and God forgive me, I shoved him to one side. Gwynfort ran out ahead of me and then fell behind so that I could lead, and then got out ahead again. Hallway, staircase, cloister, hallway, stair. I was getting dizzy and fearfully afraid that I was lost. I kept glancing over my shoulder. Sometimes I could see Michelangelo puffing after us in the distance. Other times he was too far back. Finally, we came to a dark, empty corridor where the stone is particularly old and shadowed. I ran to the great wooden door at the center of the doorway and banged on it with all my might. And I heard the sweet voice that I had so longed to hear. "Enter," said Abbot Hubert. I pushed the door open and shoved the children through. "Tell him I sent you,"
I hissed at them. Tell him everything. Where are you going? Jean demanded. To head off Michelangelo. And with that, I ran back the way I had come to meet the enemy, and the door slammed behind me. And that is my part of the great journey of Jean, Jacob, William, and Grinfort, the Scottish chronicler concludes. Everyone around the table begins shouting at once. What? What happens next? What happened with Michelangelo? Did he punish you? Did he attack you? What about Hubert? And the children? And the dog? What happens? The only person not shouting is the little nun. I am not surprised. Please, sister, I say, tell us what happened behind Abbot Hubert's closed door. Her mouth forms a little question mark. However would I know, she says, but her eyes are glinting with pleasure. You seem, I say, to know all sorts of secrets. Please, sister, share them with us. She looks at me like I'm being very impertinent, and then she says, very well.